Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I go to my buddy's bar all the time, he owns the place, and we go way back to high school. The bar isn't anything fancy, just a neighborhood spot where locals come to unwind after work. My buddy installed security cameras a while back and I helped him set them up one weekend. We put up 4 cameras around the place, but only one of them actually points at the bar area where the employees work. One evening, I stopped by around 5 p.m. The place was dead. I was the only customer sitting at the bar, nursing a beer and scrolling through my phone. The bartender working that night was this guy my buddy hired a few months ago. I'd seen him around a few times but never really talked to him much. I watched him disappear into the back room for a minute, and when he came back out, something about his demeanor seemed off. He kept looking around nervously and his movements were jittery. He wiped down the same spot on the bar 3 times. Then he walked over to me and leaned against the counter. He asked if I knew the owner pretty well. I told him we've been friends forever. He said he figured as much and that the owner seemed like a good guy. Then he mentioned that he'd just helped the owner install a brand new security system in the bar. That immediately raised a red flag. I knew for a fact that was a lie because my buddy and I had installed those cameras together months ago. I played along and asked him how many cameras they put in. He said 4 cameras, all high definition and really top of the line stuff. I just nodded and said that sounded nice. I took a sip of my beer and wondered where this conversation was going. Why would he lie about installing cameras? What was the point of bringing it up? Then I saw it. Clear as day. He walked over to the register, opened it like he was checking something, and I watched him slip a few bills into his front pocket. He tried to be smooth about it, but I was sitting right there watching the whole thing. I called him out on it. I told him I just saw him take money from the register. He froze for a second, then tried to play it cool. He told me to relax and said the owner made plenty of cash and wouldn't miss a few bucks. Then he offered me $20 if we could just forget about the whole thing. I told him to make it 40. He looked annoyed but reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 20s. He asked if we were cool now, and I pocketed the money with a smile. I offered to buy him a drink. He seemed relieved and poured himself a shot. I poured one too and we clinked glasses. I told him he had a pretty smart little operation going and asked how long he'd been doing this. He said a couple weeks. He explained that he'd figured out pretty quick that the owner didn't watch the footage that often, and when he saw where the cameras were pointed, he knew he could get away with it. I said it was a smart move lying about the new camera system to make me think there were cameras everywhere, so I wouldn't say anything. He agreed and said I got it. We chatted for a few more minutes, and I made sure to act like I was totally on his side. Then I checked my watch. It was just past 6 p.m. I told him I needed to step outside for a smoke and would be right back. I walked out the front door and immediately called my buddy. I told him his bartender was stealing from him right now and that his 5th camera caught the whole thing. I said I was pretty sure the bartender had turned off the other 4. My buddy asked if I was serious, and I said dead serious. I explained that I'd watched him pocket cash from the register about 10 minutes ago and that he'd even tried to bribe me to keep quiet. My buddy said he was coming down there right away and asked me to keep the bartender busy until he arrived. I hung up and lit a cigarette, taking my time. After a few minutes, I went back inside. The bartender was still behind the bar, and there were now 2 other customers who had come in. I sat back down and ordered another beer. I started making conversation about how the owner could be kinda cheap sometimes. The bartender immediately agreed. He said I had no idea how bad it was and that the owner nickel and dimed everything. He said that's why he didn't feel bad about taking a little extra. I said I heard him and that the guy probably made 5 times what he paid his employees anyway. The bartender said exactly. We kept talking trash about my buddy for another 10 minutes. Then the front door opened and my buddy walked in with 2 police officers right behind him. My buddy told the bartender to get out from behind the bar because the cops were there to arrest him for theft. The bartender went completely white. He looked at me, then at the cops, then back at my buddy. He insisted he didn't steal anything and that my buddy didn't have any proof. My buddy said the bartender had turned off the 4 cameras, but didn't know about the hidden one. The bartender just stood there frozen. One of the officers told him to sit down and not move while the other officer went to the back room with my buddy to review the footage. I could hear them talking back there, and after about 5 minutes they came back out. The officer told the bartender he was under arrest for theft. The bartender protested and said this was complete garbage. He pointed at me and accused me of setting him up. I just shrugged and told him I didn't set him up. I said he stole money and bragged about it, and that was on him. They handcuffed him and led him out of the bar. The other customers who had come in were staring at the whole scene with their mouths open. After the cops left, my buddy came over and sat down next to me. He tried to hand me back the $40, but I waved him off. I told him to keep it and use it to buy a better camera system. My buddy said my tab was free that night and probably for the next month. The bartender is still waiting for his trial date. My buddy showed me the footage from the hidden camera and it's crystal clear. The guy is finished. The office felt different that morning in March 2021. Everything felt different back then, with half the team still working from home and the other half rotating in and out. I've been managing my team through the chaos of lockdowns and remote work, and most people were doing their best under weird circumstances. Then I got assigned a new team member. She was fresh out of college, mid-20s, full of energy and ideas. The kind of person who could talk endlessly about projects and strategies and innovations. Problem was, none of it ever seemed to materialize into actual work. The first few weeks seemed okay. She was enthusiastic during team meetings and always volunteered for new projects. But then clients started complaining. Emails went unanswered. Deadlines got missed. Projects she'd promised to handle by end-of-day Friday wouldn't be touched until the following Wednesday. Every time I brought it up, she had an excuse ready. She'd explain that the client was being difficult or that she was drowning in work. She'd insist she'd sent that email, but it must have gone to spam. Technical issues, family emergencies, on and on. Never once did she just admit she'd dropped the ball. I tried being understanding at first. I redistributed some of her workload to other team members. I sent her resources on time management and organization. I even offered to sit down and help her prioritize her tasks. Nothing changed, and if anything, it got worse. Other team members started complaining to me privately that they were picking up her slack. One of our longtime clients threatened to take their business elsewhere because she'd ignored 3 separate requests for updated reports. After our monthly meeting one day, I pulled her into my office. I tried to be direct but fair. I explained that her performance was dragging down the whole team and my job was keeping everyone on track. I told her I understood that people struggled sometimes and that life happened and work got overwhelming. But I pointed out that when I asked about projects and she kept saying everything was fine, only for things to fall apart later, we had a real problem. I explained I wasn't starting formal performance management yet. I just wanted quick Monday morning check-ins, 10 minutes to go over the week's objectives and see if she needed support with any clients. Nothing intense, just accountability. She nodded and agreed, but I could see it in her eyes. She hated every second of it, hated me for making her do it. The check-ins were awkward. I kept them short, tried to be helpful rather than critical. I offered to redistribute work if she was overwhelmed. She barely spoke during them, just gave one-word answers, and left as quickly as possible. I started noticing she'd arrive late on Mondays, right when our meeting was supposed to start. She'd rush in with coffee and apologize, saying traffic was terrible or her alarm didn't go off. During the meetings, she'd tell me everything was under control. Then I get emails from clients later that week saying she still hadn't responded to them. A few weeks later, I got a call from accounting around 2 in the afternoon. They had questions about some unusual purchases on the company purchasing card. The card wasn't in my name, but I had access to it for small office purchases and client expenses up to $500. I shared an office with another team manager, and we both kept the card in a drawer we could access. Accounting asked about a Photoshop subscription for $19.99 a month, some food delivery orders totaling around $80, a streaming service subscription for $14.99. I had no idea what they were talking about. I told them to check with my colleague. Apparently, he didn't know anything about them either. I figured maybe someone had stolen the card number somehow and we just need to cancel it and get a new one. Monday morning, I got called into the director's office. Over the weekend, accounting had called the companies to trace where the transactions came from. They discovered the accounts were registered in my name, using an email address that looked like mine but with slightly different spelling. My stomach dropped. I felt physically ill sitting there while the director went through the list of charges. He lectured me about appropriate use policies and signed agreements and privileges. He mentioned that the total was approaching $200 in unauthorized charges. I could barely process what he was saying. I denied using the card inappropriately, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. My mind raced. Had I somehow saved the card details somewhere? Had my wife accidentally used it? Was this some kind of mistake? I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd somehow done this without realizing. I apologized repeatedly. I explained I knew none of those expenses were appropriate. I begged for the transaction details so I could investigate. The director said he'd email me everything accounting had compiled. He told me I had until end of business Wednesday to figure out what happened. He made it clear my job was on the line. When I got back to my office, she was waiting by my door. Grinning, she mentioned she'd been waiting for our morning meeting. I told her something had come up and we'd meet tomorrow. She asked if I'd actually be in tomorrow, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Confused, I said yes and asked why I wouldn't be. She sipped her tea and said there was no reason in particular. Then she turned and walked back to her desk. Something felt wrong, but I was too stressed about the card situation to think clearly. I spent the next few hours calling my wife, calling the companies, retracing the same steps accounting had taken. Someone had definitely used my name and the company card to make purchases online, but who and why? My wife confirmed she'd never touched the card and didn't even know where I kept it. I started making a timeline of when the charges happened. They'd started about 3 weeks ago, right after I'd implemented the Monday check-ins. The food delivery was her mistake. When I called them and explained what happened, giving my name and the card details, they told me where the food had been delivered. Our city. That ruled out identity theft or data breaches. This was someone local, someone who knew me, someone who had access to the office. My gut told me who. I pulled up her employee file and checked her address. Then I opened the map and compared it to the delivery address the company had given me. The delivery location was on the corner of her block. My heart was pounding. I checked the other delivery orders. 2 more addresses, both within a block of her apartment. I was furious, but I needed proof before I went to the director. That night after she left, I got the IT guy to give me access to her work laptop. I explained the situation, and he agreed to stay with me to witness everything. When I logged into her company email account, I found it. The fake email address using my name, saved right there in her account. I had IT pull up her browser history. She'd been logging into the streaming services and food delivery apps from her work computer. She'd even used the Photoshop subscription to edit some personal photos I found saved in her downloads folder. She'd been clever about some things. Used the office network so the purchases would trace back to our location. Had food delivered to nearby addresses instead of her actual apartment. Even created a fake email. But she'd saved everything on her work computer. IT helped me screenshot everything and compile it into a report. I called the director that night around 8:30. Kept the IT guy on the line with me to witness that I hadn't made anything up. I walked him through exactly what I'd found. The director was silent for a moment after I finished. Then he told me to send him everything and that he'd handle it first thing in the morning. He apologized for doubting me. The next morning I got to the office early. I wanted to be there when it all went down. Around 9:15 the director called her into his office. I watched her walk down the hall, still carrying that same confident smirk. She was in there for about 20 minutes. When she came out, she was crying. Security was escorting her. She had a box with her personal items from her desk. I made sure I was standing in the hallway. I had a cup of tea in my hand. It had gone cold while I waited, but it still tasted sweet. She looked at me and her face changed. The tears stopped. She realized. She knew that I knew. She opened her mouth like she was going to say something, but security kept walking her toward the exit. The director called me into his office an hour later. He apologized again and thanked me for getting to the bottom of it. He explained that she'd been fired for theft and fraud. He said the company was considering whether to press charges but wanted to avoid the publicity. He asked if I wanted to pursue it personally. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to, but mostly I just wanted to move on. That evening I ordered food delivery to her address, $25 worth of burgers and fries, used my personal card, left a note in the special instructions that said goodbye and good luck. The director apologized to me several more times over the next few weeks. Word got around the office about what happened. My team members who'd been covering for her were relieved. The clients who'd been frustrated finally started getting proper service again. We stayed on good terms until I left for a new position in October. She never apologized. I never saw her again. The director ultimately decided not to involve the police. He said the company just wanted to move forward. I didn't push for it either. I just wanted to move on. I had been doing woodworking for about 15 years when I finally saved enough to buy my own place. After months of searching, I found it. A small house with enough land for privacy, and most importantly, a shed out back that was perfect for my workshop. I spent weeks before closing making sure everything was in order. Property surveys, title searches, the whole 9 yards. The shed sat comfortably within my boundaries, about 20 feet from the property line. Moving day should have been exciting. Instead, it turned into a preview of the nightmare to come. I was carrying a box of kitchen supplies when he walked over. Mid-40s, beer gut straining against a stained tank top, cheap beer already in hand even though it wasn't even noon yet. He didn't introduce himself, didn't offer to help, just planted himself in my driveway and stared at the shed. He told me that the shed was on his property, said it like it was a fact, not a question. I set down the box thinking maybe I'd misheard him. I asked him what he meant. He repeated himself, claiming the shed sat on his land. Added that the previous owner knew it and they had some kind of understanding about it. I told him I had the property survey and that the shed was well within my boundaries. He dismissed that, saying it didn't matter what the survey showed because the old owner had told him different. I offered to show him the documents, thinking maybe seeing the proof would end this before it started. He refused, said he didn't need to see them because he already knew what was his. He took a long drink from his beer, his eyes never leaving the shed like he was already planning how to take it. Then he walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with my mouth open. I figured he was just territorial, maybe testing the new guy. I was wrong. The harassment started immediately. The next morning I found garbage bags torn open and strewn across my lawn. His dog, a massive German shepherd, started appearing in my yard daily to relieve itself. When I mentioned it, he just shrugged and said he couldn't control where the dog went. Then he added that maybe if I didn't have that shed taking up space on his property, the dog would have somewhere else to do his business. The music started the following week. Heavy metal at 2 in the morning, bass shaking my windows. I called the police twice. They'd show up, he'd turn it down, and an hour after they left it would start again. Every single conversation came back to that shed. He was obsessed with it. I showed him the survey documents. He refused to look at them. I offered to have a professional surveyor come out. He said they'd all lie for money. I even contacted the previous owner who confirmed the shed had always been on my property and that my neighbor was delusional. Nothing worked. If anything, he got worse. Garden tools went missing. My truck got keyed. Someone slashed my tires. I couldn't prove it was him, but I knew. Then came that morning 6 months after I'd moved in. The sound woke me at 7 on a Saturday. A deep rumbling engine mixed with hydraulic hissing. I knew that sound. I'd worked construction one summer in college. That was heavy equipment. I ran to the back window and my stomach dropped. He was sitting in an excavator, one of those mid-sized ones used for residential work. The mechanical arm was extended toward my shed, the bucket hovering just above the roof. He had this satisfied smile on his face like he was finally getting what he deserved. I didn't think. I grabbed my shotgun from the safe, checked that it was loaded and ran outside in my pajamas. The excavator's engine was so loud he didn't hear me approach. I had to fire a shot into the air to get his attention. The boom echoed across the neighborhood, and his head snapped toward me. I shouted at him to get down from there right now. His smug expression vanished when he saw the shotgun pointed at him. He called out, trying to sound reasonable, telling me not to do anything crazy. I told him the only crazy person here was the one who brought an excavator to tear down someone else's property. I ordered him to turn it off and get down. He tried arguing, claiming it was his shed and he was just taking what belonged to him. I repeated my command, told him to turn off the excavator and get down immediately. Something in my voice must have convinced him I wasn't bluffing. He shut off the engine. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. I told him to climb down slowly and keep his hands where I could see them. He did, moving like every joint hurt, his earlier confidence completely gone. I told him to put his hands behind his head and lay face down on the ground. He protested, saying this was ridiculous. I raised the shotgun slightly and repeated what I said. He dropped, his cheek pressing into the dirt of my lawn. His hand shook behind his head. I kept the gun trained on him while I pulled out my phone and called 911. The operator answered immediately and asked what my emergency was. I told her I needed police at my address right away, explained that my neighbor had just tried to demolish my shed with an excavator and that I had him at gunpoint on my property. I gave her the address and she kept me on the line until I heard sirens approaching. 3 patrol cars pulled up within minutes. The officers came around back, hands on their weapons, until they saw the situation. I carefully set down my shotgun and explained what happened. My neighbor started yelling from the ground about how the shed was his, how I was the crazy one, how this was all a misunderstanding. One of the officers asked him whose excavator it was. My neighbor went quiet. The officer repeated the question, asking if it was his excavator. My neighbor said he'd borrowed it. The officer asked from who. My neighbor admitted it was from the construction site where he worked. The officer asked if he'd had permission to take it. The silence was answer enough. They pulled him to his feet and cuffed him. I retrieved my property documents and showed the officers everything. Survey maps, title documents, even the emails from the previous owner. It was all there in black and white. The shed was mine. It had always been mine. When they loaded him into the patrol car, more officers arrived. The construction company had reported the excavator stolen that morning. They'd tracked it using GPS. My neighbor hadn't borrowed anything. He'd stolen a $60,000 piece of equipment to destroy my shed. The charges piled up fast. Grand theft for the excavator, trespassing, attempted destruction of property, reckless endangerment. And because he'd taken the equipment from an active job site, his employer filed a civil suit for damages and lost productivity. The court case took months. He tried every excuse, said he'd been given permission, said the property lines were wrong, said I threatened him first. None of it held up. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge wasn't sympathetic. My neighbor got 2 years in prison for the theft, plus probation, restitution to his former employer, and a restraining order keeping him at least 500 feet from my property. His house went into foreclosure while he was locked up. A nice quiet family bought it. The shed still stands. I reinforced it after everything, added better locks, installed security cameras around the property. Most evenings you'll find me out there, working on whatever project has caught my interest. The only sounds now are my tools and the birds in the trees. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.